Hey guys, let's contain Amara. I wanted to walk you guys through making a transfer prosthetic today. This was actually my second Ko-fi goal, so this prosthetic is made possible by viewers like you. But yeah, this was one of those many bumps along the way builds, but I think it came out decent in the end. I actually was consider maybe popping some of these up on Etsy. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a good idea. But I wanted to recreate how I'd do the Mark of Cain for the show. I'm not sure how they decided to do the mark. There are a lot of different prosthetic choices. If it were up to me, though, there are very few reasons why I wouldn't do a transfer prosthetic. The only reasons I could see not to is extreme time constraints or actor allergy, but otherwise. A transfer prosthetic, sometimes called a Prosaide transfer, sometimes called a Tinsley transfer, is a prosthetic that, with some prep, can be applied in roughly 30 seconds by anyone, and pretty much just like a temporary tattoo. There's no additional adhesives or glues required. These transfers are ideal for getting your actor in and out of makeup fast. I usually keep a couple generic wounds in my kit at all times, so if I need one, I can just whip it out. They're flexible, they're durable, they blend well, and they're waterproof, so they're really all over just a great choice. They do take prep, at minimum about a week, where if you were doing a straight silicone prosthetic, you could have them done in a day. So that's why I say if there is a time crunch, transfer prosthetic isn't your go-to. I'm filming this on a table in my office since my studio space is under construction, so bear with me. Also, I've worked camera for films, a decent number. I went to college for cinematography, and yet somehow filming this with my and Matt's phone somehow entirely kicked my ass. And then the footage didn't want to upload to my computer, so forgive the wildly varying quality. But anyway, the first thing I want to impart on you is safety. Be familiar with any materials you're working with prior to starting any project. I personally also completely wrap any injuries I have. Samantha got my arm pretty good, so I wrapped it up in a comically large amount of gauze because I was too lazy to find scissors to cut it down to size. Then, and here's the important bit, stay with me, at some point between starting the project and finishing it, you want to get into and lose a fight with a horse and dislocate your wrist and thumb, so you get to add braces into the mix. Keeps things interesting, you know? I also want to note, this is meant as a sort of fun how I do things video. It's not a tutorial. I'm not going into depth about any safety procedures. If you're thinking of doing this stuff yourself, you should watch some safety videos first, especially before working with silicone and silica and all that stuff. I get my silicone from Smooth On, and they have excellent safety guidelines and tutorials for molding there. So, I guess, generic disclaimer, this video is intended for entertainment purposes only. Anywho, I made in total 4 molds, getting slightly lazier in each one, so the footage will be dancing back and forth between them, so you'll get a weird mixture of shots, I'm sure. Alright, enough blabbering. Let's get into the build. The big thing I needed was the mold, so I started sculpting the Mark of Cain. I grabbed a piece of plastic to sculpt on top of, just any junk piece, and I wiped it down good with some 99% alcohol and sculpted on that. I'm using a sulfur-free clay here, specifically medium hardness Chavant in red-brown because they were out of the gray I usually get. Sulfur can stop silicone from curing, as can latex, or a lot of things. I had a variety of pictures, but the one I started sculpting with was this picture. I molded it to look like this, but it's a very different shape to when you see it the rest of the times he has it, so I ended up doing both in the end. Once I was satisfied with the shape of the piece, it was time to get ready to mold it. First things first, you need to work on flashing. It's not complicated in a flat mold like this. I just flatten out some clay and cut it into strips and make a barrier around it. This is going to allow excess materials from our molding layer to have a channel to sit in. There are a lot of ways to make a barrier to mold something. I usually, for something like this, use foam board and hot glue. You can either get a strip and score it to make a snug fit barrier, or you can just take a strip and cut it in to make a rectangle. And if you do that, if you're careful when you remove it, you could just glue that bad boy down again later, if you're running multiple molds. This is one of those steps that you can do quick and dirty or spend more time for it to be neat. If I'm ever doing a mold professionally where I'll be using it a lot and in a public setting like a studio where others may use my mold, I take a lot more time to make things nice, squared, tidy, and look good. When I'm going to be running them myself in my home, cursing the entire time, I just slap these together and shrug and walk away. If it's just for me, I don't have to make a good-looking mold, and this isn't. Now, technically, a lot of times you don't have to grease a silicone mold because silicone doesn't like to stick to anything but other silicone, but I usually hit it up with a thin layer of PAM anyway. That increases the likelihood of a clean pull off your sculpt. Then I just mix up my silicone. I use disposable popsicle sticks and whatever plastic cup I can find. I measure out in paper cups. Some silicones need to be measured by weight. I like this silicone because it can just be measured by eye, mostly just equal parts. It's important to make sure there's no cross-contamination. If a little bit of A gets in a bottle B, it can set off a very slow chemical reaction that will semi-harden the entire bottle of B, making it entirely useless. And again, latex, sulfur, upsetting the gods, or a variety of other things can make two-part silicone decide not to cure properly. But once everything is well and truly mixed and doesn't have streaks, I just pour it in and try not to get air bubbles. And that's the moment where you just hope that you hot glued it well enough and there are no gaps for leaks. Now, for the first two I ran, I sort of forgot I was doing a mold for prosthetic transfers. For those you want a nice, thin, flexible mold, I've been running molds for other things that need a good, thick, strong base, so I definitely made my first way too thick, which just wastes materials and makes it more difficult for me in the long run. But, alas, you win some and you lose some. Once it's set and you're satisfied with no leaks, it's time to make sure that the board is level and leave it alone. Different silicones take different amounts of time to harden. I'm not looking at now, but I think this one is 6 hours. I just leave them overnight so I don't have to time myself. Once ready, it's time to pry it free, starting with the outside and then working from the edges inward. Now, if you don't need to run a second mold, yank that puppy free with abandon. If you're hoping not to have to resculpt to run it again, a much slower approach is necessary, and if you're very careful, sometimes you can pull it off without lifting up your piece. Sometimes. And then you have a mold. I always clean it off with water and dish soap and then finish it up with some 99% alcohol just to be sure. I then usually hack at the edges to clean them up, more for aesthetics than for function, but it does mean less places where the transfer material can get stuck if you're running this a bunch of times. And then it's time to make a prosthetic. There are 3 ways of doing Prosaide transfers. The right way, the easy way, and the easier way. The right way. You need a stand mixer and a crap ton of Prosaide. Prosaide is a surgical adhesive that we use for most prosthetic applications. The right way is throwing that Prosaide in there and just setting it to mix for a few hours to evaporate the water until it's the right consistency. But you have to watch it because if you overmix it, it's useless. The easy way is to take Prosaide and mix it with Cabosil, a powdered silica, to achieve the thickness you want. The easiest way is to just buy Bondo, which is just a Prosaide cream which has been thickened already. And you can find on a couple of websites, usually for a bit more money, prosthetic transfer material of one type or another, already whipped up, but we're going to ignore those options right now. For the first batch, I used Prosaide cream, and for the second batch, I used Prosaide and Cabosil. There isn't really a difference. Don't breathe in Cabosil. That's, really bad for you. You can get Prosaide creams that are guaranteed latex-free. The ones I have are using a possible latex cross-contamination, but I don't have a latex allergy, so I wasn't concerned. The next thing is coloring. This is the hardest part of Prosaide transfers. Prosaide is white but dries clear, which means whatever colors you're putting into this is coming out much darker and more translucent. So you sort of have to experiment until you get what you want, unless you really know how the color acts. You can color prosthetic transfers 2 ways. One is with a touch of acrylic paint, and one was with flocking. Or in my case, both. Acrylic paint can also be mixed with latex to make Pax paint, which is used a lot of times in prosthetics, usually to cover up over the top of a piece, but it will limit stretch and tends to be a bit more opaque. I usually use just a touch of acrylic to make it a bit more opaque. I still want some translucency, and do the rest with flocking. Flocking is just very, very fine fibers. I get mine from the same site I ordered Prosaide through, but there are a lot of sources for it. Then it's just mix it up until you think it's the right color. I keep it in a small pot, so when I find the color I want, I can just mix up a huge batch and make sure it matches what I did before, so I can just keep on going and going, especially if I'm doing a piece that's going to need to be the same and I have a whole bunch of them for a project. For this, I'm opting for a medium reddish brown. I could go lighter or darker. I really liked how this color came across. You can see how pink it is when it goes in the mold. The trick is to make sure it gets into every nook of the mold. Again, for these, you can hit them with a touch of Pam and optionally a touch of baby powder, but it's not necessary. Could have used high row slip to make the mold more self-releasing, but it wasn't worth the effort for these small pieces, in my opinion. Also, if you're using Pam, make sure it's original. You just want vegetable oils. You don't want like butter flavoring or whatever other nonsense they can throw in there. You can also use a commercial mold release, but most of us don't for projects like these. But I fill the mold well, trying to make sure there are no gaps or air bubbles, and then I lay a piece of acetate paper over the top. I'm using two-sided acetate. If it was one-sided, I'd have to make sure I had the right side down, but ain't nobody got time for that, so. Then I just take any smooth edge, popsicle stick, cardboard, foam board, credit card, and smooth that puppy down. I want the acetate to have 100% contact with the back of the piece, and for all the excess to be pushed into that channel on the outside. So it ends up looking like this, and then it has to hit the freezer for an hour. I have to flash freeze it so I can pop it out of the mold and it keeps its shape. Demolding is the place where this is most likely to go wrong. I put the piece flat and I lift the mold up off of it. This is where that thin, flexible mold makes life much easier. You just want to make sure you don't peel the acetate off of the prosthetic and leave it behind in the mold. The smaller pieces, like this has those two little bits, that's the hardest. When it's all one solid piece, it's so much easier. Oh well. Once the piece is out, it's the boring part. The prosthetic has to dry all the way through. In a nice, warm, dry location, like I imagine Arizona might be a lot of the year, this can dry pretty fast. In a swampy, miserable place like New York in this weirdly rainy summer, not so much. A Prosaide transfer can take anywhere from a couple days to a couple of weeks to dry, depending on conditions and thickness. A food dehydrator can cut that time down immensely. My food dehydrator didn't work when I went to try it. Remember how I said everything went wrong on the shoot? So I just built a new one with a microwave box, tin foil, a heat lamp for my snake, and a small fan. Whatever, it works. And boom, a week later I had these bad boys. Now to put them in my kit or transfer them or anything, I heavily powder them. Sometimes in baby powder, but I try to stay away from it. Usually I just use cornstarch for basically every prosthetic and half the FX makeups I do. It's scentless, it's what commercial makeup powders are usually made from anyway. It's easy, it's cheap. Occasionally I'll use a rice powder, which has like a flesh tone pigment to it, in it, but usually it's just cornstarch. Remember, these prosthetics are made of medical adhesive, so they will stick to literally anything that gets near it. So the powder is important. But on that note, I usually have to take a little bit of alcohol to the surface to make sure there isn't too much powder on it when it's time to put it on. Then, application. I take the transfer paper, shiny side down, press it firmly to the prosthetic piece, rub it on to make sure it's well contacted. If you're actually doing this for real and not just to show someone how to apply it, trim around it so you know where the fuck the prosthetic is. I don't here, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. Then I slowly peel off the acetate. If the prosthetic is stuck to the acetate, I just flip it over and give it an extra firm rub again until I can get the acetate off entirely. Then to clean and hairless skin, I put the prosthetic down where I want it to be. There is no repositioning. Wherever it contacts the skin is where it lives. And then I press down firmly. Then it's just a temporary tattoo. Wet paper towel, hold it firmly to the paper, let it soak through, and then slowly and carefully lift the paper, and bam, it's on. It's done. Prosaide is an adhesive that is only sticky when dry. When you put it on a prosthetic, when you're putting on a prosthetic with it, you need to let it dry before it's tacky, before you place your piece. So when the prosthetic is made of Prosaide, with the outside powdered to make it not tacky, the unexposed side retains its adhesive properties. So the second it touches your skin, it glues itself on, kind of like a very strong sticker. I usually finish this up with some flesh tone powder that matches the actor's complexion, just to help it blend into the skin. If it's necessary, I might use some rubbing alcohol on the edges to help them blend down into the skin. It usually isn't. I also make sure that wherever I'm applying it, the actor is relaxed. If I'm doing it the inside of the arm like this, I'd want the arm to be looser, more bent at the elbow, looser than you see here, but I had to reach for the camera. These things will stretch, so that's fine. But if you have it stretched out and then they relax and the skin bunches up, it can cause creases in the prosthetic. And since it's made of glue, it wants to stick to itself as well. And you can see here what not trimming and being careful does. First off, I shaved my arm in like a straight line, which doesn't look too bad in photographs, but in person looks real ridiculous. And then I applied it off center and got it in the hair anyway. But, other than that, I love Prosaide Transfers. It takes less than a minute to apply, and anyone can apply it, and they look great. They're flexible, they're waterproof, the actor can be taking a shower in them or standing in the rain, and it wouldn't affect them at all. They could sleep in them, but I would never make an actor go home in makeup, especially since it only takes a minute to reapply the next day. I find people going to conventions are the ones that tend to sleep in Prosaide Transfer prosthetics, just so they don't need a bunch. This one I kept on for 6 days, showering every day. It gets a little darker as you wear it, and you can see the creasing, but it doesn't look bad. 2 to 5 days, I'd say, is the average time it'll look good. I've heard of somebody wearing it for like 14 days and it still being passable. The only thing you want to avoid is direct scrubbing or direct soaps, lotions, and alcohols. They can start to break down the adhesive. Sweat usually doesn't affect them. If you get an actor who really is pouring buckets, it could be a factor to watch out for, but I find that's more true for like forehead pieces or than like arm, torso, leg pieces, mostly because of the greasiness than the sweat. The big one is alcohol. If you have an actor who is drunk, which I certainly have had before, alcohol is in their sweat. Like, people joke that someone is sweating vodka. It's not a joke. They have some vodka in their sweat. And boy, that will take off any makeup. Drunk actors sweat off every scrap of makeup they have on, which makes life just great on a shoot. Prosaide prosthetics can be used most places on the body. You don't want it anywhere near the delicate parts of the eyes. I usually try to keep it off the face in general when I can, but occasionally it comes up. I try to keep it out the back of the knee or the inside of the elbow, between the fingers. I also usually don't do large pieces as transfers. 1, because it's hard to dry, and 2, because it just gets unwieldy. I usually go for foam latex or silicone for those. I also would not use these on small kids. Removal is easy. If you've been wearing it a while or sweating buckets, sometimes they'll just come up with a pull once you get an edge up. Otherwise, mineral oil, baby oil, isopropyl myrstrate, alcohol. The trick is getting the first edge up because the edges are usually tight, and then after that, it's pretty easy to just keep pulling. You want to do it slow, though, not like a Band-Aid. It is medical grade adhesive, so it can damage the skin if it's done too quickly. But it won't as long as you're careful. But yeah, Prosaide Transfer. Lots of prep, lots of materials, but it makes such a quick and easy thing to use. And you can make dozens if you're going to be doing this on an actor like a lot of days in a row, like this would be. I hope you guys enjoyed a quick look into the whole process of making this, and yeah, let me know if you think I should pop these on Etsy. I have the molds now. I almost feel like I might as well. Anyway, I encourage you guys to check out my Patreon. I do full supernatural commentary, episode commentary over there. As always, feel free to drop me an email or find me on Twitter, AO3, and Ko-fi. I look forward to doing more SFX builds in the future, and if there is any supernatural prop or makeup at all that you'd love to see, let me know in the comments as well. Alright, I'll see y'all next week.